I stared at the bank statement in disbelief. $5,600,000. Gone. Every asset, every property, every share of the construction company I'd built over 35 years. Transferred. Liquidated. Vanished. And the signature on all the paperwork? Mine. At least, that's what they claimed. My name is Richard. I'm 65 years old, and 3 weeks ago, I was a successful businessman with a thriving construction company in Phoenix, Arizona. Today, I'm sitting in a studio apartment in Tempe, surviving on Social Security payments, trying to figure out how my own family destroyed everything I'd worked for. But this isn't a story about losing. This is a story about what happens when a dead woman's love proves stronger than a living woman's greed. I started Hammond Construction in 1988 with a pickup truck, a toolbox, and more ambition than sense. My wife Carol was pregnant with our son Brian, and I was determined to build something solid for our family. She believed in me when banks wouldn't. She worked 2 jobs while I bid on my first projects, making sandwiches at midnight so I'd have lunch on job sites. We scraped by. We struggled. We survived. By the mid-90s, we were doing well. By the 2000s, we were thriving. Residential developments, commercial buildings, municipal contracts. Hammond Construction became one of the most respected firms in the Phoenix metro area. We employed over 100 people at our peak. We had a reputation for quality work and fair dealing. Carol managed the office, while I ran the sites. We were partners in every sense of the word. Then, 7 years ago, Carol had a stroke. She was only 56. One moment she was reviewing invoices. The next, she collapsed at her desk. The doctors said it was quick, painless. I'd been on a job site in Scottsdale. By the time I got to the hospital, she was gone. The woman who'd believed in me, worked alongside me, built this life with me, just gone. Brian, our only child, flew in from Denver immediately. He was 32 then, working as a project manager for a tech company. I remember standing in our house after the funeral, surrounded by 30 years of memories, and Brian saying, "Dad, you don't have to do this alone. Margaret and I are here for you." Margaret was Brian's wife. They'd been married 8 years at that point. She was a CPA, smart and efficient, with dark hair always pulled back in a tight bun and an air of absolute competence. She'd done our taxes a few times, caught some deductions our previous accountant missed. Carol had liked her, said she was sharp, said Brian had married well. In those dark months after Carol died, Margaret became my lifeline. She stepped in to help with the office work Carol had managed. She organized everything, filed paperwork, handled accounts. Brian supported her moving to Phoenix to help Dad get through this. They bought a house in Chandler, 15 minutes from my place in Gilbert. "Richard," Margaret said one evening, about 6 months after Carol's death. We were in the Hammond Construction office, papers spread across the conference table. "You've built something remarkable here, but the way it's structured, if something happened to you, taxes would eat half of it before Brian saw a dime." I trusted her. She was family. She was a licensed CPA. She explained trusts, LLCs, estate planning strategies I didn't fully understand, but that sounded smart. Carol had always handled this kind of thing. Made sure I understood every financial decision. Without her, I felt lost in the terminology. "I'll set up some meetings with specialists," Margaret said, her voice warm and reassuring. "We'll protect everything you've built. For Brian's future. For your legacy." Over the next year, there were dozens of meetings. Estate planning attorneys who seemed to defer to Margaret. Accountants who nodded along with her recommendations. Documents to sign, corporate restructurings. Property transfers into various LLCs. Margaret explained, "Each one, this is for tax efficiency. This protects assets from liability. This ensures smooth succession." Brian attended some meetings, trusting his wife completely. "Margaret knows what she's doing, Dad," he'd say. "This is what she does professionally." I signed. I trusted. What choice did I have? They were family. The changes happened gradually. Margaret suggested I step back from day-to-day operations. "You've earned retirement, Richard. Let the younger managers handle it." She arranged for my company credit card to be updated with new security features. My access to the main business bank account was temporarily restricted during a banking system upgrade. My name was removed from certain properties because the LLC structure requires specific title holders for insurance purposes. I noticed, but I didn't question. Not really. Not until 18 months ago, when I went to the office and my keycard didn't work. I called Brian. Son, something's wrong with my access card. There was a pause. Dad, we need to talk. Can you come to the house? I drove to their place in Chandler, my stomach tight with anxiety. Margaret sat at their dining room table, papers arranged in neat stacks. Brian stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder. Neither smiled. Richard, Margaret began, her voice clinical. We need to discuss some concerns about your cognitive function. My blood went cold. My what? You've been showing signs of decline, she continued. Forgetting meetings, confusion about business operations, poor decision-making. We've consulted with an attorney, and we believe it's time to implement the conservatorship provisions in your trust. What conservatorship? What are you talking about? She slid a document across the table. My signature was at the bottom, dated 14 months earlier. I didn't remember signing it, but there it was, notarized and legal. You agreed to this, Dad, Brian said quietly. He wouldn't meet my eyes. When you started showing signs of memory issues, Margaret explained that this would protect you if you couldn't manage your affairs anymore. I'm not confused, my voice rose. I don't have memory issues. What the hell is going on? Margaret's expression remained neutral. The trust documents transfer management authority to Brian and me in the event of your incapacitation. We're exercising that authority. For your own protection, I hired a lawyer, Tom Morrison, someone I'd known for years from the Chamber of Commerce. He reviewed the documents, and his face fell. Richard, these are ironclad. You signed over control of everything. The business, the properties, your personal accounts. There's a conservatorship provision that activates if you're deemed unable to manage your affairs. And Margaret, as your designated financial manager and a licensed CPA, has that authority. Can we fight it? Tom was quiet for a long moment. We can try. But you'd need to prove competency, and they've already documented instances of confusion, missed meetings, and poor judgment. Do you remember signing these? I didn't. But the signatures looked like mine. The notary stamps were legitimate. I'd been in Margaret's office dozens of times. Signing papers, she explained, were routine business matters. Which ones had been the trap? The legal battle lasted 7 months and cost me every liquid asset I could access. Margaret controlled the company accounts. The properties were in LLCs she managed. My personal accounts had been drained gradually over the previous months for various expenses and investments she'd recommended. Tom fought hard, but the judge sided with Margaret and Brian. I'd signed the documents. I'd granted them authority. The signatures were genuine. Without clear evidence of fraud or coercion, the legal structure stood. Hammond Construction, the company I'd built from nothing, was now controlled by Margaret and Brian. The 6 rental properties I owned were in LLCs managed by Margaret. My house in Gilbert, the home Carol and I had bought in 1995, had been sold 6 months earlier. The proceeds invested in vehicles I had no access to. I moved into a studio apartment in Tempe. $900 a month, paid from my Social Security. At 65 years old, I was back where I'd started at 25, except now I was broken, betrayed, and alone. Brian stopped returning my calls. The few times I saw him, usually by accident at a grocery store or gas station, he'd look away, hurry past. Margaret had won completely. She'd taken everything, and she'd used my own son to do it. I spent months in that apartment, barely functioning. Depression sat on my chest like a physical weight. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out where I'd gone wrong. How had I missed it? How had I been so blind? The local senior center offered free counseling. A woman named Patricia, maybe 50 years old with kind eyes, listened to my story without judgment. Richard, she said gently, what happened to you is called financial elder abuse. It's more common than you think, and it's often perpetrated by family members. You're not stupid. You're not weak. You were manipulated by someone you trusted. But I signed the papers, under false pretenses, with information withheld. That's fraud, even if it's hard to prove. I didn't believe things could get worse. I was wrong. 6 months into living in that apartment, I got an eviction notice. The building had been sold. The new owners were renovating. All tenants had to leave within 60 days. I couldn't afford first and last month's rent for a new place. I had nowhere to go. I started packing my belongings, what little I had. Most of my stuff had been in storage, another monthly expense I could barely afford. I'd been putting off going through it, couldn't face the memories of my life with Carol, the life Margaret had stolen. The storage unit was in Mesa, one of those climate-controlled places off the highway. I'd kept it because it held Carol's personal items, things I couldn't bear to throw away but couldn't stand to look at. Her desk from the office, her filing cabinets, boxes of photos and memories. I spent a whole day there, going through boxes, deciding what to keep and what to finally let go. Most of it was painful, every photo a reminder of what I'd lost. Carol at Brian's graduation, Carol at the company's 20th anniversary party, Carol and me at the Grand Canyon on our 30th anniversary, her smile bright despite the cancer scare she'd beaten 2 years earlier. Then I found a box I didn't recognize. Plain cardboard, sealed with packing tape, my name written on top in Carol's handwriting. Richard, personal, important. I opened it carefully. Inside were files, documents, and a sealed envelope with my name on it. The envelope was dated 2 months before Carol's stroke. My hands shook as I opened it. Carol's handwriting, neat and precise. "My dearest Richard," it began. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and I pray you never needed what's in this box. But I couldn't leave you unprotected." I sat down on the concrete floor of the storage unit and read. "I didn't want to worry you, but I've had concerns about Margaret for the past year. Small things at first, documents that didn't match her explanations, accounts she said were closed but weren't, transfers she called routine that seemed anything but. I started keeping my own records. I started asking questions she didn't like. My throat tightened. 3 months ago, I confronted her. I told her I'd noticed irregularities, and that, as a co-owner of Hammond Construction, I wanted a complete audit. She said I was mistaken, that I didn't understand modern accounting practices. But Richard, I ran our office for 25 years. I understand perfectly well." I kept reading, tears blurring the words. "I've documented everything in the files in this box. I've also updated our estate plan with a different attorney, one Margaret doesn't know about. Michael Chen in Scottsdale. His contact information is attached. I've placed copies of all important documents in a safety deposit box at Arizona Bank and Trust, branch on Gilbert Road. The key is in this box." My hands fumbled through the contents. There was the key, attached to a small tag with an account number. "I've set up protections, Richard. Real ones, not the kind Margaret can manipulate. If anything happens to me, if she tries what I think she might try, these documents will prove fraud. Michael knows everything. The safety deposit box contains proof of our actual wishes, signed and notarized properly, witnessed by people with no connection to Margaret." The letter continued with details, legal references, account numbers. Carol had suspected. Carol had prepared. Carol had tried to protect me even from beyond the grave. I pray I'm wrong about Margaret. I pray this is all unnecessary caution from a woman who's become paranoid in her old age. But if I'm right, if she does what I fear, please know that I loved you, I believed in you, and I made sure you'd have the tools to fight back. You're not alone, my darling. Even now, I'm with you. She'd signed it, "Forever yours, Carol." I sat in that storage unit and sobbed. Carol had known. She'd tried to warn me, tried to protect me, and I'd been too grief-stricken to see it. The files in the box were meticulous. Carol had documented every meeting with Margaret, every financial recommendation, every document she'd found suspicious. She'd taken photos of bank statements, made copies of corporate filings, tracked money movements across accounts, and she'd done something brilliant. She'd updated our estate documents with a completely different attorney, using language that invalidated any future changes made under duress or diminished capacity. She'd created a separate trust, unfunded during her lifetime, but designed to activate if specific conditions were met. Conditions that exactly matched what had happened to me. I called Michael Chen the next morning. His secretary said he'd been expecting my call for years. "Mr. Hammond," Michael said when he got on the line, his voice warm but professional. "I'm so sorry it took this long. Carol made me promise not to contact you unless you reached out first. She said you'd need to find this yourself when you were ready." "You knew? All this time?" "I knew what she suspected. I helped her prepare for it. And I've been maintaining the trust she established, waiting for this call." We met the next day in his Scottsdale office. He was younger than I expected, maybe 45, but his eyes were sharp and his manner confident. "First," he said, pulling out a thick folder, "let's go through what Carol set up. Then we'll talk about what happens next." The trust Carol created was brilliant. She'd funded it with a life insurance policy I didn't know about, enough to cover legal fees. She'd included specific provisions that invalidated any estate planning done after her death if it deviated substantially from her stated wishes. She documented her concerns about Margaret in affidavits, witnessed and notarized. "The key piece," Michael explained, "is the safety deposit box. Carol updated your actual estate documents 3 weeks before she died. These versions, which you'll find in the box, explicitly name me as successor trustee and include provisions preventing anyone else from making changes without court approval and independent counsel. But I signed new documents with Margaret under false pretenses, and those documents contradict Carol's explicit instructions, created when she was clearly competent and free from influence. Arizona law is very clear on this. If we can prove fraud, everything Margaret did unravels." We went to the bank that afternoon. The safety deposit box had been sitting there for 7 years, untouched, waiting. Inside were documents, evidence, and one more letter from Carol. This one was shorter. "Richard, if you've made it this far, you've found the truth. Now fight for it. Fight for us. Fight for everything we built together. I believe in you, just like I did in 1988. Now believe in yourself." Michael filed motions within the week. The evidence was overwhelming. Carol's documents, dated and notarized before her death, explicitly contradicted the story Margaret had told. The estate plan Margaret claimed to be executing didn't match Carol's actual wishes. The conservatorship I'd supposedly agreed to violated provisions Carol had specifically included to prevent exactly that scenario. But the real bombshell was what Carol had documented in her personal files. She'd tracked Margaret's movements of money, small amounts at first, gradually increasing. She'd found evidence of accounts Margaret had opened in my name without my knowledge, back when she first started helping with the business. She'd documented conversations where Margaret had pressured her to change estate plans, offers to simplify the business structure in ways that would give Margaret more control. Margaret had been planning this for years, probably since before Carol's death. The stroke had just accelerated her timeline. Michael brought in a forensic accountant. What they found was staggering. Over the 18 months Margaret had controlled Hammond Construction, she'd funneled over $2 million out of the company into accounts she controlled. She'd sold 2 of the rental properties and pocketed the proceeds. She'd used company funds for personal expenses, disguised as business costs. The evidence went to the county attorney's office. Criminal charges were filed: fraud, forgery, theft, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The list went on. Brian finally came to see me. He looked thin, haunted. We met at a coffee shop in Chandler, neutral ground. "Dad," he said, his voice cracking, "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know the extent of it." I wanted to stay angry. Part of me was furious that he'd sided with her, that he'd let this happen. But he was my son, the boy Carol and I had raised, who'd learned to swing a hammer on my job sites, who'd been there at every milestone. "She told me you were getting confused," he continued. "She showed me instances where you'd allegedly forgotten meetings, made mistakes with the business. She said we had to protect you before you lost everything. She said it was temporary, just until you stabilized. And you believed her. She's my wife." Was my wife. We were married 12 years. I trusted her. He looked up at me, tears in his eyes. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I should have questioned more. I should have talked to you directly, instead of letting her filter everything." The divorce papers were filed before the criminal trial even started. Brian lost everything too. Margaret had used their joint accounts just as freely as mine. The trial was swift. Michael presented Carol's evidence, the forensic accounting, the pattern of fraud spanning years. Margaret's attorney tried to claim she'd acted in good faith, that any irregularities were honest mistakes. But the evidence was too clear, too damning. She was convicted on 14 counts: fraud, theft, forgery, exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The judge sentenced her to 12 years in prison and ordered full restitution. Her CPA license was permanently revoked. Getting Hammond Construction back took longer. Margaret had made operational decisions that had to be unwound. Some employees had quit, some clients had gone elsewhere, but the core was still solid, still built on the reputation Carol and I had established over decades. Brian came back to work with me. We rebuilt together, father and son, the way it maybe should have been from the start. He'd learned hard lessons about trust and manipulation. So had I. The rental properties were returned. The money Margaret had stolen was slowly recovered, though legal fees and restitution took their share. I moved back into a house, not the one Carol and I had shared. That was gone. But a new place in Gilbert, a fresh start. I used some of the recovered funds to establish the Carol Hammond Foundation, dedicated to helping elderly victims of financial abuse. We provide legal aid, counseling, and education. Patricia from the Senior Center serves on the board. We've helped over 200 families in the past 3 years. I'm 68 now. Hammond Construction is stable, profitable, and will genuinely go to Brian someday, protected by real legal structures that Carol set up and Michael maintains. Brian remarried last year. A schoolteacher named Jennifer, who had no interest in our business, and made that clear from day one. We all laughed about that at the wedding. I keep Carol's letters in my desk drawer. I read them sometimes, when I need to remember that love doesn't end with death. She protected me when I couldn't protect myself. She believed in me when I'd forgotten how to believe in myself. She gave me the tools to fight back and the proof I needed to win. Margaret is in Perryville Prison in Goodyear. She'll be eligible for parole in 6 years. I don't think about her much anymore. She was a thief and a manipulator, and she got caught. That's all there is to it. What I think about is Carol, her wisdom, her foresight, her unwavering love. I think about how she spent her last months alive, not knowing she was dying, but preparing to protect me anyway, just in case. I think about the lessons I learned, hard and painful. Trust, yes, but verify. Family doesn't mean blind faith. Love includes protecting each other, even from other family members if necessary. And most importantly, when someone shows you who they really are, believe them. If you're reading this, if you're in a situation where someone is pressuring you to sign documents you don't understand, where someone is taking control of your finances for your own good, where someone is isolating you from independent advice, please stop. Get a second opinion from someone outside the family. Consult with an attorney who represents only you. Document everything. Trust your instincts. Elder financial abuse is real, it's common, and it usually comes from family members or trusted caregivers. It happened to me, a successful businessman who thought he was too smart to be fooled. It can happen to anyone. Carol saved me. She gave me one last gift, the gift of justice and recovery. Not everyone has that, but everyone deserves protection, dignity, and the security of knowing their life's work won't be stolen by those they trusted most. I'm standing in the Hammond Construction office now, the same office where Carol collapsed 7 years ago. There's a photo of her on my desk, that smile that made me believe I could build anything. Next to it is a photo of Brian and Jennifer at their wedding. Hope for the future. I built this company with Carol. I lost it to greed and manipulation. I got it back because Carol loved me enough to plan for dangers I couldn't imagine. And now, I'm building something else. A legacy of protection for others. A way to honor the woman who saved me one last time. She's been gone 7 years, but she's still here. In every document she prepared, every provision she included, Every word of those letters. Love doesn't end. It protects. It endures. It fights back when you can't. Thank you, Carol, for believing in me then, for protecting me now. Forever yours, indeed.